All right, guys, so for months and months, maybe even years at this point, I've been promising to get back to making some more Scotch content on the channel, and today is finally the day that I keep my word on that. We're gonna kick things off with a review of a bottle that has probably been discussed ad nauseum in various whiskey groups and by online reviewers, and that is this Arran 10-year-old single malt Scotch whiskey, a relatively affordable and relatively available bottle depending on where you live. For those of you who don't know, I actually started Drums and Drams 3 years ago with the idea that this would be a Scotch-focused channel. I was drinking a little bit of American whiskey at the time, but if you go back and look, the first reviews on Drums and Drams were Glenmorangie, Johnny Walker, definitely thinking more Scotch at the time, but I was promptly bitten by the American whiskey bug, so went down the bourbon rabbit hole, the rye rabbit hole, and sadly enough, I even stopped drinking Scotch at home, almost entirely. Sarah and I used to drink Scotch together quite often. Then it became on occasion, and then it pretty much became never until a few weeks ago, I began revisiting Scotch. It felt like, reacquainting myself with an old friend in preparation for starting this new series on the channel. So we're gonna release Scotch reviews every Sunday. We can just call it Scotch Sunday for now. I love alliterations. So you can expect these every week, and we'll kind of see what people like, if this is something that people want to see. Even if it's not, I'll probably continue doing it. So let me know in the comments if you enjoy this video, but I've talked long enough. Let's get into this Arran 10-year. I have two glasses in front of me. I've talked about this before on other videos, the Remus Gatsby Reserve Batch 2 that I released maybe a few weeks ago. You can go check that video out. I do this same kind of glass discussion in that video, and we're gonna do it here with this Arran. But first, let me tell you about the Arran. It's at 46%, 10 years old, obviously age stated, non-chill filtered, natural color, all the good things we like to see. Very simple presentation here in this tube. We're gonna get into it now. Let's check this thing out on the nose. We're gonna start with this glass, this shorter glass. I'll move on to the taller one, which is a little bit of a smaller glass with a more narrow taper at the top. But for now, let's start with what I would call kind of like my daily driver, my daily drinker kind of glass. Let's see what we get on the nose here. Arran 10-year. What I love about this Arran 10 on the nose is just how vibrant and fresh it is. And the other words that come to mind are focused and direct. So I'm not saying that there's a lack of complexity here necessarily, but this whiskey does have a lane, and it sticks to that lane. And that's what I mean when I say direct and focused. It's very to the point. It jumps out of the glass. You don't have to go searching for it. It's right there. It will meet you at the rim of the glass, I promise. And again, fresh, vibrant, lively. These are words I would use to describe this. And the corresponding notes that I would call out to kind of help build the picture or paint the picture of what this is. We're talking on the sweeter side of things, that kind of sweet, malty, honey kind of note that you come to expect from a 10-year, primarily ex-bourbon cask matured Scotch. You're gonna get those malty, those honey notes, a little bit of kind of vanilla, almost sometimes I talk about a white cake note. Those are all coming through here, but there's also a really nice fruity element to this as well. A little bit of this sour apple, sour pear coming through. So first impression, fresh, vibrant, lively, very direct, very to the point, and a great combination of typical but well-presented sweet and sour 10-year Scotch notes. So that was a mouthful. Let's go back in, one more nosing, and then we'll get this thing on the palate. The last thing I'm gonna call out here before I taste this whiskey is sort of an orange tea note that is starting to come through a little bit more. I notice I've been holding this whiskey on the actual kind of main part of the glass, let's say, the bulb of the glass. I think it's heating the whiskey up just a little bit. And as a result, this orange tea note is starting to blossom out of the glass. There's also just a little hint of this kind of golden raisin note that you come to expect from a younger, maybe slightly sherry matured Scotch. I think there might be some ex-sherry casks in here, although I'm not entirely sure. Let me know in the comment section if you guys have a definitive answer for that. But this golden raisin note that you get sometimes from refill sherry casks, I do find here. And the last thing I'll call out is a brighter kind of white pepper oak spice coming through. So a great combination, sweet, spicy, sour, maybe a little bit of savory, maybe a little bit of this coastal waxy influence as well. Let's get this on the palate now. Cheers, guys. This is very impressive on the palate. Great first impression from this Arran 10. Right away, sweet and sour on the front of the palate. That is the first thing that hits you. All of those rich, sweet, malty, honey kind of notes, vanillas, mingling in with this sour green apple, sour pear kind of note. It begins the development, it begins to roll back with the help of those kind of white pepper, brighter oak spice notes. As you get into the mid palate, that's when it starts to fill out a little bit in terms of its fruit element. It gets into more of that orange tea note and that golden raisin I talked about. That happens in the mid palate. And then as it rolls into the finish now, I'm left with a little bit of this, what I would sometimes call like a musty basement note, which is kind of this oak, almost this oak funk, but in Scotch whiskey terms, not necessarily the same kind of oak funk that I would discuss on an American whiskey, but in this case, it's almost like this musty, damp basement is what I'm left with on the finish. Of course, with a little bit of this sweetness hanging around. Certainly on the finish now, I would say it's a white cake note on the sweeter side of things, and a bit of that white pepper spice hanging out as well. Overall, again, a great first impression on the palate. I think this is very well put together. The development never lulls. It never jumps out, crazy out of line. It's steady. It goes from front to back very well. I would say it mostly meets your expectations as you're drinking this whiskey. There's just a little extra sourness, I think, to the palate than what I expected on the nose. The nose felt maybe more heavy sweetness, and the palate goes a little more heavy onto the sour, but that's okay. This is, again, an entry-level $50 to $60 single malt, 10 years old, with a great presentation, 46%. Nothing to complain about here. I think it's really, really great stuff. And now I want to pull out this other glass, which again, a smaller volume. I talk about this quite often on lower proof spirits. Most of the scotches that I'm going to review will probably kind of fall into this category for American whiskey drinkers that we would refer to as a lower proof, whereas in Scotch whiskey terms, 46% is actually a great presentation for something that's not a single cask bottling, at cask strength. When you deal with these lower proofs, it sometimes helps to put the whiskey in a smaller volume glass with a more narrow taper towards the top, because it's gonna concentrate those aromas a little bit more. But in the case of this Arran, which is a whiskey that I thought could benefit from this, I actually found before this video, as I did this quick side-by-side, that this kind of a glass, a smaller volume glass, actually detracts from the whiskey. So very quickly, I'm gonna nose this. And when you have the whiskey in a glass like this, one that is younger, and as a result, a little tighter, maybe a little bit more spicy, a little closed off in some sense. If you have a whiskey that is going to tend towards those attributes, putting it in a smaller glass is a bad thing, because it's gonna close it down even more. And in this case, when I nose the Arran out of this smaller glass, all I get is white pepper, ethanol, a little faint vanilla sweetness, but it completely lacks a lot of those fruit notes and that kind of full-bodied orange tea note that really centers this whiskey. It lacks all of that in favor for more, kind of top notes, I suppose. So in this case, on the nose, this smaller glass would not be a good choice. And now let's test it on the palate. This focuses the whiskey even more. And because it already is a whiskey that I've said is direct and focused, I don't think putting it in a glass like this to further exacerbate that is something that I would want to do. So all this to say, first and foremost, the Arran, a fantastic whiskey, 50 to 60 bucks. If you're looking for a great entry-level single malt that hits above its price point, something on that sweet to sour side, no smoke, not super complex, not a big sherry bomb, but an approachable, sweet, kind of everyday, easygoing sipper, this is a great choice. And then secondarily, when you're considering glassware for any whiskey, but in particular lower proof spirits, it's worth testing out different volumes of glasses. But in this case, whereas I would have thought a smaller volume glass would work, my testing shows me that it's actually a hindrance to the whiskey. So it's worth checking out. It's a fun thing to explore, not even just doing a whiskey side-by-side, but a glassware side-by-side. with different tapers, different volumes, etc. Check it out. Let me know what you think. Thank you guys for tuning in. Arran 10, Scotch Sunday. We're gonna keep doing these things. Hit that like button if you enjoyed the video. Let me know what you like. Let me know what you didn't like, what I can do better for next time. Cheers, and I'll see you next time here on Drums and Drams.